Welcome back everyone. Today we'll be going ahead with the session 2 of the week 4. Now if you recollect the last session, we had basically discussed about the buyer persona and I gave you a perspective about how this is useful in general in the domain of marketing or specifically in sales management as well. We also had a brief discussion about that. Now as we'll move forward, or as far as this particular session is concerned, once we are done with this, you'll be able to understand various consumer and business to business decision making processes. You will also be able to understand what is the role of salesman in various facets as far as the stages of consumer and B2B decision making are concerned. Apart from that, we'll also understand the difference between B2C and B2B selling. Before we move ahead towards understanding, the process of, or maybe we can say all these dynamics about how consumers actually make decisions, or maybe how decisions are made in industrial buying or business to business buying. So before that, we really need to understand what exactly consumer behavior is. So in simple words, we can say consumer behavior is all about, or it is related to consumer actions which usually maybe take account of how they are searching for information, how they are purchasing, how they are using the product after they have been purchased, how they are evaluating whether they are satisfied with the product or they are not satisfied with the product, or whether they are delighted with the performance of the product, and finally how they even dispose of the products and services after their shelf life is over. Now there are actually two ways to understand the consumer decision making process. One is maybe we can look at it from the perspectives of input, process and output. In other ways, we can also look at it by answering a few fundamental questions which I'll put across as we'll move forward. Now when you start understanding the process from precisely these three facets, whether that is input, process and output, we usually say that input is all about what is being fed to the consumer or an individual even before the process starts. Like what is it that is hearing, maybe let's say from the marketer about 4 P's about the product, price, place and promotion. Like you are definitely going to make a judgment about the product before even going to the shop to evaluate it or to look at it from advertisements, what you see in advertisements. Even with respect to price, you might form a judgment, because usually how people feel is if the product is, let's say, not very expensive or is priceless as compared to what they perceive as a fair price, they might feel okay, the quality may not be that good. Or even when the price is very high, then also they might perceive okay, it is an unfair pricing to them. So the whole idea is all these forms in which the communication takes place, let's say through advertising on social media platforms or maybe through bus agents, you are definitely going to form an opinion about the product with respect to everything, the place which is sold. Let's say if you notice a very hi-fi, or I would say a well decorated or well maintained, or a store which has a extremely good ambience and is selling something, you will feel okay, this must be something good. And even if something is being sold, let's say at a very smaller shop or something, you might have different mindset. I'm just talking about this is how usually many individuals perceive things. Definitely there are going to be a lot of exceptions to this as well. Now when you talk about the input part, it also takes account of a lot of socio-cultural factors, like which culture you belong to, which subculture you belong to. Then it also takes account of your family or how you have grown, as an individual, or maybe what are the skills or perceptions that you have, kind of taken from your family in terms of socialization. Technically this is termed as socialization. As we'll move forward, I'll definitely explain you this particular concept also. Apart from that, reference groups, opinion leadership, all these things are also going to make an impact with respect to the input part. Now when we talk about process, we are actually looking at, the various dynamics of how consumers recognize their needs, whether it is an actual need or it is a desired need. Then we move to the next part, which is about how they actually collect information, how they process it, and what are the parameters that they use for evaluating different alternatives. Like you might have someone who will only say that with respect to buying a mobile, the only criteria I have is definitely what is the quality of the camera, right? Whereas you might have someone who would say no, for me what matters is the battery backup or the battery life that the particular mobile offers. So this is basically the process part. Then finally when we get to the output, we are trying to understand the purchase behavior and post purchase behavior, which is mainly about whether the individual or the consumer is satisfied with the product, dissatisfied or delighted. Delighted is basically a stage when whatever is being given to them with respect to their perceived experience with that particular product or service, it exceeds far more to the expectations that they had. So that brings a delight factor, and definitely salespeople have an important or crucial role to play when we talk about the delight factor. Additionally, in this stage, we'll also be taking account of the phase of cognitive dissonance. So what I explained you was more or less, or maybe I can say a little more technical with respect to understanding this process. But if you answer these 5 questions, then also you will get your answers how consumers make buying decisions. So the first question is, who is important in buying decision? And if you recollect, in one of the sessions we had also spoke about initiator, influencer, decider, buyer and user. Now just imagine from a salesperson's perspective, you know, if he convinces the initiator, he convinces the influencer, and what if he fails in convincing the decider? Now even if the other parties of the buying center, or maybe we can say the parties which are finally involved in deciding whether the order will be placed or not, and the decider is not convinced, things may not work out. So the whole idea of understanding this is, it is important to understand who is going to take the final call. Now let's say you will see in a lot of products with respect to children, they are targeted at their parents because they know they'll be eventually making the final call whether the product will be purchased or not. Now the next question is, how do they buy? Now specifically with respect to this question, we actually understand the need recognition facets, how they collect information, and we can't deny the fact that how internet had made it easy for us to collect information, or everything is just a click away. And this also gets reflected with respect to how we negotiate at stores, right? You will see many time people saying to the salesman or the dealing assistant, I am getting this product for this price at an online channel, or maybe at this shop, or maybe through this buying website or anything, and then you try to negotiate on the basis of that. Apart from that, we are also going to consider what is their choice criteria, right? What are the evaluation parameters that they use, and finally where do they buy, whether they'll prefer buying online, offline, and also from which retailer. See, when they are continually buying from the same retailer, it also shows in a way that the same retailer has been patronized, which means it has become a part of their habits. Now when you as a salesperson will try to get to these, you know, people who are already being buying from the same retailer since long, you will definitely have to go an extra mile to convince them or to offer them something better. Better as in better than their current supplier or seller. And finally, when do they buy? This again becomes important because see, even as a salesperson, you will focus on first dealing with those people who have an immediate need, not the ones who are saying that they'll be considering after 6 months. Definitely you are required to put in a lot of efforts to convince them also, but your priority should be the ones who have the immediate need. Now let's get to the again technical part, input. Input simply indicates the set of strategies which marketers, or I would say even salesmen, use with respect to reaching out, informing and persuading shoppers to buy. Now as already explained, this considers a lot more facets about the communication part, or the opinion that usually, opinion as in I would say the better word would be perception, the perception that a prospect or a consumer usually forms about the product, pricing and place strategies of the marketer. Now as I was telling you, another important facet of the input stage is definitely the socio-cultural influences. Now in that, first thing that we are going to talk about is reference groups. Now reference groups are groups of people that either have a direct and indirect influence on your attitude and behavior with respect to your buying decisions. Now let's say if you plan to buy a two-wheeler, you might discuss it with your family, right? You might discuss it with your friends, and they might also offer you an opinion or share their, maybe you can say, opinions about which is a good one, which is a bad one, and that might also come from their actual experiences. Now all these groups, whether it is family, whether it is your friends or colleagues in your office, all these have a direct influence on you because you are in a way interacting with them on a daily basis. But there are certain groups that might have an indirect influence on you also, like celebrities, someone you admire who is using a particular product, you will also be stimulated to buy the same if you have a very high regard or admiration for them. Now this comes as a part of indirect influence on non-membership groups, the groups you don't belong to but you would definitely like to imbibe their purchase values or purchase recommendations, we can also put it that way. Now apart from that, the other socio-cultural influence that you have is of an opinion leader. Now opinion leaders are usually someone who have an expertise with respect to a particular product category, or they might have in different product categories, which means it is not limited to one product category, and they usually offer you informal advice. Let's say you decide to buy a DSLR or maybe a mobile. Now you might have someone in your group, maybe your friend or someone who is close to you. You know, you might reach out to the person considering he has all the information about DSLRs or maybe the models or how it should be evaluated. Similarly, with respect to a mobile or any product that you are contemplating to buy. Now in this case, these are the people who usually offer you informal advice. That is what we call as an opinion leader. But the whole point is, opinion leaders are usually those who by choice, you know, have an interest in certain product categories and they keep themselves updated. Now when you move to the next socio-cultural influence, we usually talk about family. Now family is, you know, simply defined as the two or more people who are staying together, or they could be related by blood or marriage. Now families also can be divided into two parts: family of orientation, in which we talk about parents and siblings, then family of procreation, in which we consider spouse and children. But the important part which we need to consider is the concept of socialization. Now socialization simply means when you are growing as a child, right? You pass through different stages of life as a child, then you get to your teens, then maybe you move to adolescent, and then you know, get more older. So the point is, you will definitely, you know, develop a lot of preferences or maybe shopping values or buying behavior habits with respect to how the family has been behaving for long. Just consider this example. Let's say if with your parents or with your siblings you have been going to a particular restaurant, even after getting married you might have a preference for that. So the whole point is, you will develop a lot of preferences and how you buy or how you even evaluate. You know, you might, let's say if someone sees definitely some of their family members always negotiating with the shopkeepers, they might also develop that trait. So that is usually called as an aspect of socialization. Put simply, it is more like how you evolve as a consumer or a buyer with respect to the purchasing values that your families has always been displaying. So this is how a family impacts the buyer behavior. Apart from that, we also consider social class as a part of this input and as a socio-cultural influence. See, social class simply means when you put different classes in a hierarchy. Like in India, you might have upper class, middle class, what they consume with respect to their income, education level, their jobs, it is going to be very different. So that's how social class is also going to impact what one buys and what one doesn't buy. Then the last element which we have is culture and subculture. Now when you talk about culture and subculture, while culture can also be cited as the personality of society as a whole, right? Because you also imbibe with respect to the culture, what is it that you are going to buy, what is it that you are going to consume. Similarly, when you talk about subculture, it provides a specific identification. Maybe you can understand it this way, like our food habits are very different from people in south, even if you look in different communities. Just consider, let's say if you consider one particular community with respect to how, you know, usually their marriage culture is all about how people get married, which activities are taken care of, you will be able to see that their purchase basket is going to be entirely different even in that particular aspect also. So when you look at culture and subculture, they definitely have a huge impact with respect to our buying habits, what we eat, even what we wear. All these things are definitely going to have a lot of impact. Now we'll get to the next important part, which is about the process. Now one thing or the first important aspect is need recognition. When you talk about need recognition, in one way it can be said as maybe when you feel a sort of deprivation or something, maybe you can say in a situation where you face a problem. Now even when you get to the needs further, it can either occur on account of natural processes, like let's say if someone is placed with a, maybe let's say a baby, either a boy or girl, they are definitely going to now purchase or buy things in a different way. Even if you look at it very primarily or at a micro level, their disposable income now could be shifted to different things with respect to when they were kind of, not having a baby, because then they could be spending their income in a different way. Right now they might decide to save more for the child or things like that. Now it can also occur on account of other factors like someone getting married, right? Then also what they buy, what they purchase, even with respect to who decides, things are going to be entirely different. Apart from that, it can also occur on account of marketer stimulation. You saw an ad and it was a very hi-fi, well crafted ad hitting your emotions in the right way, then also you might feel the need for a product, or I would say you could be stimulated to buy that product. If you discuss this further, we basically look at it in the form of two states, like actual state and the desired state. Actual state simply indicates the states when the product becomes faulty or there is an issue with the product, or in other words you can say when there is a problem, right? Let's say you got into the college, or maybe you got into you just started your MBA, now you might need a laptop. So this can also be a situation. It is not always going to be like that your product has become faulty, right? So this is one state. Now the other could be a desired state, where you are basically stimulated by an ad or something, or where you don't actually have a need, you just desire to own that product. Now as far as a salesperson's role is concerned, first is he needs to understand whether the needs are functional or psychological. Functional means whether the product is being bought simply on account of its functional values, let's say, or it is being purchased on account of its psychological value, like it could boost your self-esteem, it could be maybe on account of ego defensive mechanism or something like that, right? Let's say if you need a pen, you might decide to buy any 10 rupees pen, or you might decide to buy very expensive Mont Blanc pen which could be worth rupees 34,000. So it simply indicates that you are buying that product not just for its functional value but also because of the psychological value or the prestige that it brings in. So if salespersons gets a better idea of that, they can have conversations with the prospect or consumer keeping these things in mind and making sure that the things can be taken forward. Apart from that, they also need to understand the need inhibitors, which simply means what is it that prevents a need from being activated. Like I'll give you one example. Let's say if you are a salesman and whatever you sell is only going to be online, you might see that the prospect may not have that much of trust, or would simply say might have a lot of distrust on online channels because of his past experiences. So this can act as a need inhibitor with respect to moving him to get to the further stage. So a salesperson is also required to take care of that also. Apart from that, it becomes very important with respect to the role of a salesman that he should make the needs felt to the prospects as well as the customers. So this is an important facet where he needs to kind of work towards making the other party or the prospect or the customer realize how this particular product or offering, I would say, is going to solve their problems or maybe satisfy their needs. If not solving the problem, how they will help them improve their business, functional processes and other things with respect to the particular offering. Now once the need recognition phase is done, a consumer usually gets to the phase of pre-purchase information search. Now this is a simple stage in terms of that the consumer, or I would say the prospect, will be collecting information about products. Now he can do it through personal channels, he can ask his family, friends, neighbors, colleagues, or through commercial like the ads that he watches on television, radio, or the billboards or hoardings that he sees in the market or she sees in the market, or the information that he gets from salespeople or helpline numbers. Apart from that, it can also occur on account of experience, which means when the person himself or herself will go to the shop and will try to handle the product, see how it functions, right? Now in this particular stage, things are only going to vary with respect to a search product or an experience product. Now search products are simply those products for which you can kind of take the buying decision on the basis of information that is available, let's say online or through other means. You actually don't need to handle or experience those products. But for experience products, you might need a handling way out. Let's say if you decide to buy a DSLR or a camera, you might prefer, how it would click, what would be the quality of pictures, you would like to see that. Whereas with respect to a search products, this is not something which is important. Apart from that, people, or I would say prospects or consumers, usually get a lot of information from mass media channels. Let's say they might read about certain products and services on social media platforms like Instagram, Facebook, or you also have a lot of forums where people talk about certain products. Like you might find certain groups for bikes like Bullet or other popular bikes, in which you will see that they have certain groups where people are only talking about those particular products. Now see, as far as this particular stage is concerned, it is definitely impacted by three buying situations, whether it is an extensive problem solving situation, limited problem solving situation, or automatic or routinized problem solving situation, along with product involvement. Now extensive problem solving are those situations where you know the problem that you are facing, or maybe let's say a consumer is facing, is very new, or the need is new. So in this case they have no past experience, so they'll go at a great length to collect more information about products or services. They'll even look for a lot of information about buyers, and then they will even go for an extensive evaluation on the basis of the parameters that are important to them. Now as far as this stage is concerned, a salesperson's role is to provide all the required information to the prospect or the consumer to build goodwill. So if you remember, in earlier sessions or in few sessions, we definitely spoke about how a salesperson should best act as a consultant to the prospect or the consumer, in which their primary role is to share all the required and accurate information with the prospect, or fulfill their needs for the information which they want, right? Now when you talk about the limited problem solving, now this particular is a stage when you know the prospect or consumer already has some kind of past experience with the product in question or sellers. So in this particular stage, some more information could be collected, or he could even consider some new sellers to make sure that he is making the best decision, or that he is getting the best offer, right? So in this case, a salesperson's job is to make sure the prospect stays with you and doesn't move to, I would say, the competitor. Along with that, it is also important that you make them realize how your offering is much better, still much better than the new players that have come in the market, and your focus should be on taking prospect, or I would say the existing customer, to your side when it belongs to the competitor. So this stage is particularly all about making sure that you still be in the preference choice list of the prospect or the consumer. You might be required to offer something extra if the need be to retain the consumer, you should do that. Whereas the next buying situation is automatic or routinized problem solving. In this case, you just go ahead and reorder, not much information is collected, you are already satisfied. But I think if you talk about practical situations, there could be, you know, minor discussions about how the deals can be improved, or maybe you can say how the buyer can get a little extra or something more from the seller. See, as I told you in the beginning, specifically in this stage, the role of technology and internet penetration cannot be undermined. Earlier situation was that even if you need more information, you might be required to go to stores and talk to salespeople. Now that's not the case. You can find a lot of information online. You can even verify what the salesperson told you is right or not, and then you can finally make your product or service choices. So this particular facet of internet penetration and growing technology rather require salesperson to be on their toes with respect to being updated about information, and also being sure that what they are sharing is accurate and reliable, because the other person definitely has the power or the way out to verify that, and that too just a click away. Now when you move further and we talk about evaluation of alternatives, these basically are dimensions which consumers use to evaluate products. Let's say if you decide to buy a mobile, you might look for camera quality, you might look for battery life, you might even look for the screen size, you might look for the resolution, and all these things, right? So these are going to be a choice criteria. But another thing is, as a salesman, we also need to understand what is more important for the prospect or the consumer. See, if the prospect says, okay, what matters for me is only the battery life, then you should also build your presentations and discussions around that. But usually we say that the choice criteria can further be classified as economic, social, and personal. Economic means when we are only orbiting around the facets related to performance, reliability, and price, right? Maybe you can say something which is more functional. Other thing could be social, need for social acceptance. Now you can basically understand this from this way, let's say if you are in a group and everybody is using an iPhone, then you might also go ahead and purchase the iPhone because you want to be socially accepted in that group. Now you are not operating precisely from the functional aspect, or maybe we can say from the economic aspect. You are only looking at it from the perspective of social acceptance. So this is another thing which makes an impact. Apart from that, it could also occur on account of personal factors or personal parameters, how product or service relates to the individual psychology or maybe self image. See, this becomes extremely important with respect to consumer buying. Your choice of clothes, what you wear or what you use will also be coming from your self image. Self image in the sense like how you perceive yourself, and also with respect to how you want to be perceived by others. Let's say if someone wants to get the attention in a group, or they want to be perceived as someone who stands out in the group, then your choice of clothes is going to be entirely different. You might prefer something which is more attractive, out of the box and funky. So when it comes to consumer buying, it definitely makes an impact. Apart from that, with respect to evaluation of alternatives, it is your beliefs that actually account a lot for. Now belief simply means how in your mind you consider or you decide whether the product, a particular product or service possesses certain characteristics, right? Because it is all going to be on the basis of what you perceive rather than what actually is. Now apart from that, it is also your attitude and intentions which are going to make an impact or influence your evaluation of alternatives. Attitude means simply your liking and disliking for the product, or in other words you can say whether you evaluate a particular product or service positively or negatively. And intentions means whether on the basis of attitude, what is the probability that you are going to act. See, eventually you might have a positive attitude about something, but what matters for a marketer is that attitude gets converted into intentions and you finally go ahead and buy the product. Now as far as the evaluation stage is concerned, this particular model is very popular, which is called as expectancy value model. Now this simply indicates that consumers evaluate products and services on the basis of their positive and negative brand beliefs, which again indicates what's more important is what they perceive in their mind than what actually is. Now when you talk about what they perceive, it again becomes important whether the salesman or a marketer in general, what is it that they are trying to build or communicate with respect to their integrated marketing communications program. But when we talk about evaluation of alternatives, it also becomes important which parameter is important for you and which parameter is not. Now I think it is quite self-explanatory that as far as a salesperson's role is concerned, it becomes important for him or her to understand the choice criteria, then work on their sales pitches as well as their presentations orbiting around the same thing. Because see, if you, let's say if I am going for a selling a particular a computer system, then if you have someone who is basically worried about the backup, or maybe let's say the screen size of the monitor, then definitely you would prefer talking more about that rather than talking about the other facets which may not be that much important for them. So this is another thing which is going to make an impact. Now when you talk about the process part, there is also the psychological field that plays an important role with respect to influencing how do consumers buy. Now when we are talking about the psychological field, we are actually taking account of these three important facets, which is motivation, learning and perception. Now when you talk about motivation, we only understand what is it that encourages the prospects or consumers to buy. Again in this case also your motivators could be functional, your motivators could be psychological, right? Because every consumer is different and they must be coming from a very different thought process, or I would say needs dynamics with respect to why they buy something or why they don't buy something. Now just in brief, I'll explain you a few theories with respect to understanding the motivation part. Now first is the hygiene versus motivation factors. This basically comes from two-factor theory by Frederick Herzberg. Now as far as this theory is concerned, factors are basically looked from two perspectives. One is hygiene, other one is motivation. Now hygiene factors are basically those factors whose absence is going to demotivate you, but their presence may not motivate you. Whereas you need to have other set of factors which might motivate a prospect or a consumer to buy. Now maybe let's consider this example. If you decide to buy a rucksack or a travel bag, Then hygiene factor could be, it is definitely going to have functional zips. It's not like if you are going to open any of the zip to keep something, then it is not getting closed. This is something which you take for granted, right? But the motivation factor could be its sturdiness, its size, or maybe let's say it's very compact and still you can keep more of things. It also comes up with a special section where you can get that access to charging your phones or whatever your electronic gadgets easily. It might have that particular unique component also, so that might work as a motivation factor. So with respect to buying a laptop, the hygiene factor could be that the keys will function well. See, the whole facet of understanding this is, you might have certain consumers for whom, with respect to whether buying a mobile or a DSLR or any other product, their motivation factors could vary. For some segment it could be X, for another segment it could be Y. So this is another thing which the sales people are required to understand. Apart from that, if you get to the next theory, which is about Maslow's need hierarchy, which basically divides needs into 5 categories, whether it is physiological needs, then security needs, then social, self-esteem, and then finally self-actualization. Your pitches for products are going to be very, very different. Insurance products are entirely dependent upon security needs, right? Even if you look at these, the business of logs, or the business of keeping your valuables safe, also comes from the security facet. Whereas if you talk about the self-esteem needs, there are a lot of brands that have kind of developed their selling pitches around that. Maybe if you look at Raymond the Complete Man, or maybe look at any of the watches which actually puts a particular product with respect to prestige, or maybe the expensive pens or perfumes, all these could be related to the self-esteem part. Now other way of looking at could be need for power, affiliation, and achievement. So in this also, the kind of products that consumers buy and the pitches that are used by sellers or marketers are going to be very different. Now this is one facet which definitely impacts how consumers evaluate products, because if someone is being motivated by X, they are definitely going to evaluate products on the basis of that. Now the next thing is learning. Now learning simply indicates a relatively permanent change in behavior if you want to understand it technically. In other ways, learning simply specifies how you grow as an individual, or how you acquire the purchase and consumption knowledge and experience, which eventually impacts your future behavior with respect to what you buy and what you don't buy. Now if you recollect any of the last sessions, we have already spoken about motives, cues, responses, and reinforcement at length, and also the role of salespersons in that. So we'll move to the next part, which is about perception. Perception simply indicates how the prospects or consumers organize and interpret information. Now there are 3 important facets to it: selective attention, selective retention, and selective distortion. Selective attention means that you are only going to be attentive to, maybe you can say, some information. It's not like if you have watched 50 advertisements in television, you are going to remember each one of that, or you are going to pay equal attention to each one of them. Usually we say that what catches attention is either something which is related to your current needs, like if you are planning to buy a laptop, any ad or information that you see related to a laptop, you would be more receptive to it. Or something which could be done in a creative way. If you see a very huge hoarding, or something which is being displayed in a very odd color or in a very attractive way, you might remember that. Apart from that, what you retain is again going to be less, and this again comes from the fact that your mind has a very limited capacity to process and also to retain information. So again, whatever attention you might give it to something, in spite of that, you might only retain a part of it. Then finally you are also going to evaluate whatever you have retained on the basis of your beliefs, or maybe thought processes that you have. Let's say if from your circle or from social media you read a lot about a particular brand, that too not so good things. Now if a salesperson belonging to the same organization comes to you to sell something, then you will always have that preconceived notions, okay, I read this negative about this product, so you might have that negative orientation. Now in this case also, it becomes the responsibility of the salesman to kind of dig that out, or maybe to uncover these hidden unsaid objections and then kind of resolve those. So this is all about psychological field, and it is definitely going to make an very important impact with respect to how do consumers buy. Now as far as our next section is concerned, we will be talking about the B2B consumer behavior, or we will be looking at the process about it. Now you are done with the input part and also with the process part. Now we'll get to the output part. Now output part is all about understanding whether the consumer is satisfied with the product, dissatisfied or delighted. Now this again is going to be dependent upon how they perceive the performance of the product or the service. So usually when the product and service performance meets expectations, we usually say that the consumer is satisfied. If it exceeds their expectations, as I told you in this the same session in the beginning, it becomes delighted. But when it falls short of their expectations, it leads to dissatisfaction. But as far as the output phase is concerned, it is equally important for the marketers or the salespeople to manage cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance simply means, the feelings of doubt that the consumers may experience after even they have purchased the product, with respect to whether did they made the right choice or did they made the bad choice, or whether they have kind of went ahead and invested their money in the best deal or not. So they might go through all those feelings. So in this case also, it is the important job of the salesman to make sure that this cognitive dissonance is removed. Now this can be done by either building a very positive picture about the present product, or talking or maybe presenting negative information about the alternatives which have been foregone. See, this also becomes important because even the consumer or the buyer would like to be in a stable state with respect to his choices. Until and unless you foster that he has made the right choice, he might not even go ahead and recommend it to certain people and may not even give a positive word of mouth about your product. So as now we are done with this module where we basically understood the consumer decision making processes, whether it was about input, process and output, and also the role played by salesmen in these various facets. Now as we move forward in the next session, we'll be definitely talking about the B2B decision making processes and also the role played by the salespersons in that. So we'll be meeting in the next session. Thanking you for now.